Judge Julie Spitzer.
The court may be seated. The Scholastic Court of Arrowhead High School in Heartland, Wisconsin is now in session. The defendant, Mark Twain, and his novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, have been charged with promoting racism. Jurors, you are charged with the responsibility of listening and deliberating to each verdict. Defense, please present your first witness.
The defense calls David L. Smith, author of Huck, Jim, and American Racial Discourse, to the stand. Mr. Smith, please describe yourself to the jury.
I am a proud African-American scholar, and my essay, Huck, Jim, and American Racial Discourse, is included in the book Satire or Evasion, Black Perspectives on Huckleberry Finn.
Mr. Smith, you refer to the term racial discourse throughout your essay. Can you tell the jury what you mean by it when you write this?
When I speak of racial discourse, I mean more than just attitudes about race or conventions about talking about race. Racial discourse is an idea that changes social interaction because of alleged physical differences. Racial discourse demotes the Negro to a less than human sphere.
How does Jim defy the stereotypical African American of the 1800s that the prosecution claims he portrays?
Mr. Twain demonstrates that Jim is a better man than those that regard him as their inferior. Jim is compassionate, shrewd, thoughtful, self-sacrificing, and wise. He is cautious, gives excellent advice, suffers anguish over separation from his wife and children, and he even sacrifices his own sleep so that Huck may rest. He demonstrates moral superiority when he surrenders himself to assist the doctor in treating his wounded tormentor, Tom. He is set apart from the rest of the characters with this good deed. Mr. Twain uses Jim to disprove the negative qualities that a stereotypical African American was labeled with during that period due to racism. He exhibits all the qualities that the stereotypical Negro of the period supposedly lacked.
In your opinion, how does Mr. Twain attack racism in Huckleberry Finn?
Mr. Twain's attack on racism may be subtle, but it is definitely present. Mr. Twain uses satire, meaning he ridicules the idea to provoke change. He not only attacks slavery, which was already long since abolished, but challenges the accepted negative perception of Negroes also. Many readers have sadly misunderstood this for Mr. Twain upholding racism.
Are there any specific passages in the novel that demonstrate Mr. Twain's attack on racism?
Yes. When Huck first arrives at Aunt Sally's house, Huck lies that a boat accident kept him from arriving earlier. In chapter 32, Aunt Sally says, "Good gracious, anybody hurt?" And Huck responds, "No ma'am, killed an N-word." Aunt Sally responds with relief, saying, "Well, it's lucky, because sometimes people do get hurt." Aunt Sally implies that African Americans are less than human. Many see this as a prime example of racism. However, when looked at closely, you can see that the conversation is sarcastic and exploits Aunt Sally's attitudes as racist, not Huck's own. Huck is playing on her prejudice and narrow-mindedness to spin his believable lie. Mr. Twain is trying to show different views between Huck and Aunt Sally, and how Huck has changed because of his close relationship with Jim.
What is your view on the use of the N-word throughout the novel?
Many readers reject the novel because of the use of the N-word. However, American Racial Discourse will allow us to understand the way in which Mr. Twain uses this. The term is used as a trigger to outrage readers, and also to understand American racism and Mr. Twain's attack on it. In the context of the novel, the N-word is a synonym for slave. The specific function of the term in this book, however, is neither to offend, nor only to show authentic regionalism. It also allows Jim's virtues to emerge as contradictions to racism. The N-word does not justify racism, rather it exploits it.
In your professional opinion, do you believe that Huckleberry Finn is a racist novel?
No, I do not.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Defense, please present your second witness.
portraying both that society and the people in it with chilling accuracy.
So what you are saying is that the book is not racist, and Mark Twain's use of the N-word is to provide the reader with the understanding of the time period in which the book was written, correct?
Yes.
And how do you feel about the opinion that this book is inappropriate because it includes the N-word?
I feel that those people who feel that way do not understand the book and its irony. Some concerned parents decide that the least they can do is go out and ban a book that contains this offensive word. That is the shortest sight and counterproductive. This is an enormously important book to keep in our nation's classrooms, an important weapon in the ongoing battle against racism. It is taught in the context of the history of America, race relations, and if students are taught to grapple with the book's irony.
Why do you think that people are so concerned with the N-word and the racism that it implies?
In part because we have not managed to eradicate racism in our society today. The word N-word still packs a painful punch. It is a word that can hurt, that can be used to deny the personhood and humanity of the person to whom it refers. People will cease to debate the presence of this offensive word only when racism has been so completely eradicated that the pain the word inflicts will be a subject of historical interest only.
Well, if this word is so detrimental, then why doesn't Twain just change the N-word into something less offensive?
Twain could not change the language of his novel without incorrectly portraying the time period. By the time Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn, he understood that the N-word was a racial slur. If you clean up the language of the racist in this novel, basically all the white characters, including Huck, then you're cleaning up a messy, disgusting, dirty chapter of the past. The N-word is offensive. So was slavery. If we sanitize the past, we forget the rawness of its pain, but also the force of its lessons.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Defense, please present your next witness.
The defense calls Jocelyn Chadwick, assistant professor at Harvard and author of The Dilemma, Reading Race and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, to the stand. Mrs. Chadwick, please describe yourself to the jury.
I am an assistant professor at Harvard. I have taught classes on Huckleberry Finn. I have written a book on the subject of racism in Huckleberry Finn, and I am an African-American woman that can trace my lineage back to my ancestors who were slaves in Texas.
Mrs. Chadwick, when did you first read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn?
I first read this book when I was 7 years old, N-word and all.
Why did your parents have you read it so young?
My father and mother were active in civil rights movements and believed that nothing should be hidden from me. And as an African-American, I should know my cultural history.
Do you agree with what your parents did?
Yes.
Mrs. Chadwick, can you please describe the option that you had in the class you taught on Huckleberry Finn?
In the class I taught, I gave the students the option to read Lola Leroy instead of Huckleberry Finn if they found Huckleberry Finn too objectionable.
How does Lola Leroy compare to Huckleberry Finn?
Lola Leroy uses similar language and deals with harsher issues. It is about a woman who was sold into slavery. Students have a chance to compare the two novels. I believe they are both good books because a good book should cause people to furrow their brows and seek out someone to talk to.
Mrs. Chadwick, do you believe that Huckleberry Finn should be taught in schools?
Yes, it is an important work by one of America's most prominent writers, and it deals with a difficult time in American history. Race is one of the most complex issues in the country, and we as people can't talk about it. This book acts as something provocative that will spark conversation. The past should not be forgotten, or it will be repeated.
Mrs. Chadwick, would you consider the novel The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn to be racist?